Hello, comic creators. Welcome back to the Comics Experience podcast where we talk to you about the creative and business aspects of being a professional comics creator. My name's Gamal. The gentleman virtually next to me is Andy, and today we are going to talk about Comics Pro. For those of you who are not aware, over the past weekend, Comics Pro actually just wrapped up in, I believe it's Los Angeles, but it may be someplace else that's not Los Angeles.
It
Um,
was LA. Yeah, that's right.
right. So, Andy, I know you didn't go this year because you had other things that you were doing. But you have been to Comics Pro in the past. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's that. Both of those things are correct. I did not go this year, but I have been in the past, and
Okay.
it is essentially a convention. I assume that was your next question. What is
Yeah.
Comics Pro? All right.
That's my next
So
question.
it's essentially it's a comic convention, but not for fans. It is retailer focused. So there's a ton of retailers that come and a whole bunch of publishers that come. Some creators attend. Some press attends. There's definitely other people as well, but it's primarily about publishers and retailers getting together and having conversations, which runs from anything from, if you're a larger publisher, you can get a slot where you essentially have a panel and you can present. And it's not the same thing as a convention panel where it's like announcing a series, although they can do some of that too. It's often announcing like a new retailer program where, let's
Mhm.
say, hey, all first issues are going to be returnable for 3 months, or whatever it might be. Like, here's, we've got this new initiative where we're going to put out these classic comics to help you sell some trades of ours, and they're going to be 25 cents, or something like that. So a lot of it's, more business oriented, but it's for publishers and retailers to come together and exchange ideas. They do some bigger picture things. Like, when I went, there was a really interesting panel followed by a very in-depth discussion on things like what can we standardize, like all the data, so
Mhm.
that like a publisher doesn't have to do a separate data set for going to the Library of Congress, a separate data set for Diamond's POS system, a different data set for the book market and all this kind of stuff. Is there a way to standardize it, put in a central place that can then push out, which would be really great, a huge, game changing thing for publishers everywhere, but not something that fans are going to find at all interesting to
Mhm.
hear about. And then the other thing that they do is they do these, it's sort of like speed dating, these round tables where you get about 10 minutes where, as a publisher, I would sit at my table, and six or eight retailers would come sit at the table. We'd talk about, what, in my case, what CX is and what we're doing, what we got coming out. They'd ask questions. We'd talk about how are our books doing in your stores, all that kind of stuff. And that would go for about 10 minutes. And then somebody rings a bell, they get up, go to the next table. Somebody from another table comes, sits down. We do it all over again and again and again and again. And that's pretty fascinating. I mean, even though it's very quick, you can get a lot of really interesting and valuable feedback. You also have to be careful that you don't just pay attention to the loudest
Mhm.
voice in the room, because their experience may not be indicative of everyone else. So there is a bit of being careful, and don't just accept everything at face value, but confirm anything else. Welcome to the show, Wyatt. Um, yeah.
Well, now it sounds like Comics Pro would be what comics conventions, like in the same way that I think of like a real estate convention, or I think of like, a medical devices convention. It seems like that's what Comics Pro is for comics, as opposed to what people associate with comic book conventions, which is cosplay and film, movie stars, and all the rest of that stuff. It sounds like the where the actual deals get done, at least in the direct market, is happening at Comics Pro. So I guess my follow-up question is there quantifiable business that, are people making orders at Comics Pro, or is it more just relationship building?
Um, I saw it as more relationship building. But that's not to minimize the business impact that it could have, right? Because building those relationships has a tremendous impact and can lead to deals, like just sort of answer your question, like we weren't sitting there taking orders. Like even if we had a really good conversation with a
Mhm.
retailer, it's not like I'd be like, "Hey, do you want to put an order right now?" and like pull
Mhm.
out an iPad and like fill out a form. Like that wasn't really the vibe of what's going on. Like, a lot of it, I mean, it's formal in that you are going from event to event and they all have their purpose and their structure. And then, kind of after hours, it's much more informal where people are just kind of hanging out and mingling, which
Mhm.
is nice too, because there you meet people that you might not have met going to the more structured events.
Right.
So um I am sure that deals do happen there or they start there,
Mhm.
right? So like a conversation will take place there, but it's not like everybody's walking around with a team of lawyers ready to like, throw a contract on the table. So I think a lot of conversations start there, continue there, maybe even they close, the deal points and then
Mhm.
would actually like sign paperwork at a later date. So it has a real, business value to it in that way that could be very big. Whereas, what we tend to when we talk about conventions, what we're really talking about are fan experiences,
Right.
where it's a bunch of creators that show up and fans go and they get to talk to their favorite creators or celebrities and they get their photo taken and all that kind of stuff. And that's a very different thing. The original comic book conventions were actually more similar to what Comics Pro is now,
Mhm.
as to opposed to what they became, which is the fan experience sort of thing. So
Okay.
yeah, it's more like a trade
Right.
convention, and it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a very different vibe to it. Um, it's less crowded generally, which is
Mhm.
nice.
Mhm.
Like I'm not shoulder to shoulder.
Mhm. Well, once that the remark you made that nobody's actually got their lawyers with them to put a contract on the table explains why I've never been, because I would be completely useless in this scenario. Like nobody would want to talk to me. Um, I did hear, and every so often, if you follow the comic book trade press, you hear that there are like, I guess, announcements that would be very like appropriate in a comic book convention would happen there. Like this year, Marvel DC announced they were doing like a pair of like mega crossovers, which is something that you would expect to hear at like San Diego or New York Comic Con. Is that a something that is normal for Comics Pro, or is that like a rare thing that usually those kind of announcements don't get made?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's fairly normal. And the type of announcement that gets made, like concerning like a big event, like a big
Hmm.
crossover event, is going to be determined more on timing. So like depending on when that event is supposed to hit shelves, they may have already needed to do the initial announcement earlier. So that, maybe they did that at San Diego Comic-Con,
Hmm.
and then here they'll give more details, but it'll still be focused on the people in that room. So it'll be details on like why you're going to want to order more of it, right?
Right.
How are you going to be able to sell it to your to your um to your fans, your customers.
Right.
Um, it was interesting because I looked at some of the announcements that DC made, and I may be reading into it. I certainly wasn't in the room. I didn't
Hmm.
go this year. So I think I probably could have gleaned more, but some of the projects that they were talking up at Comics Pro seemed to me to be targeted to retailers based on feedback that we've been seeing from retailers, I think, over the last couple of years, which are
Hmm.
things like a little less tied to continuity, a little more like sort of auteur sort of voices. And so, I mean, obviously they got a Superman movie that they hope is going to be huge coming
Hmm.
out. So there was a bunch of Superman stuff that retailers are gonna be excited about. There's a big movie. We need things to sell. We need something with crypto. Well, there's a crypto year one book coming out. So like
Hmm.
that's still pretty oriented towards the stores, but then there were also things like the new Batman creative team. There's a new Superman book by Mark Waid, in which those books don't seem particularly tied to continuity, which means they're going to be new reader friendly. So you
Right.
can come in and just pick up that new number one, or whatever issue it is that Wade and company take over, and you shouldn't have any problem knowing what's going on. In that case, it's Superman when he's a lot younger, so it's not even like taking place necessarily present day.
Hmm.
Um, So I think in those cases, those seem like announcements that while they seem like it's just like hot new series with cool new creative teams, both of which might be the case, um, it also seems like they're geared towards why retailers want to stock up on these.
Right. Right. Now, is the audience that's there, because we keep talking about retailers, is it almost exclusively direct market comic book shop owners, or are there bookstore owners, librarians, other kind of distribution channel people there?
Oh yeah, it's all of it. Yeah. So when I am using retailers sort of as a bigger blanket that
Mm,
would and sort of enveloping all of those things. So some of those same projects that I was just talking about, the DC announced seem like they'd be really good for libraries because you
mm,
don't need a previous book to get into this one, right? So and same thing for bookstore chains. So I think they're gonna it's not that they're not going to talk about some of the same things that they would talk about at a fan convention,
mm,
but how they talk about it and which one specifically they choose or may choose not
mm,
to talk about are going to be because it's retailer, library, book chain, book club focus. Sometimes you've got representatives from book clubs that are
mhm.
there who have a fair amount of purchasing power. Now they may only purchase one or two titles, but they
Right.
may purchase a whole lot of copies of that title. Um, so yeah, and definitely also, direct market retailers are
Mm,
there too. And one of the things that I found really fascinating when I've gone and talked with a bunch of retailers is how different direct market retailers have become from one another. Like it has become a more diverse landscape.
mm,
You've got sort of, there's sort of like the bad stereotypes. Those types of shops and shops that, of that era still exist. And then you've got some that really specialize in indie books and really don't
mm,
carry much in the way of superhero type stuff at all. You've got some that really specialize in kids and young reader content. You've got others that are much more community focused and they they have a very specific type of customer base. Maybe it's LGBTQ plus
mm,
or there's a great shop down in Savannah, um, neighborhood comics that caters to Savannah College of Art and Design
mm,
students, and so they've got all kinds of art related stuff in there. They've become very, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them have become very curated in terms of what they're carrying because they have specific clientele. And as a publisher or as somebody as one of the distributors, because they're all going to be there too, like it's really good to know what the shop's focuses are and
right.
to understand that there isn't really a one size fits all anymore. That's not really a thing that exists.
Mm, mm. Now, if you're an independent or emerging publisher, because we've talked about like a DC or like a CEX, but if you have one book or you have two or three books and you're trying to actually expand your distribution, do you think going to something like Comics Pro makes sense, or is it more that emerging and independent publishers need to continue to focus on the fan related conventions?
Oh, I think it makes a lot of sense. In fact, it might make more sense the sort of the smaller you are,
Mm,
because you can have those conversations that are very real. So as if I'm going and I want to expand my distribution, that's a good place where I can talk to Diamond, I can talk to Lunar, I can talk to some bookstore distributors, right?
mm,
Maybe even PRH. Um, so you can have those conversations, and even if those conversations are you're not big enough for us to take you on right now, you can have the follow-up question, which is what does it take? Like
right.
what's the baseline I need to hit? Give me some
Mm,
targets. So that's super valuable. um and at the same time, if you're doing kind of indie books, then or only like you were saying two or maybe three in a year, you you can talk to retailers and you can connect with retailers that carry that type of book, or you're having conversations and you go, you know what, there is a need for
mm.
this type of a book, and you can go from there
Okay.
and produce content to fill that need.
Now, is there like the process of actually getting to go to Comics Pro, is that similar to getting into a convention as a professional? Like you have to apply several months in advance and you have to pay for this, that, and the other? or is it much more, is it a different process?
It's yeah, it's similar. Like to be like a vendor there,
Hmm.
yeah, it's yeah, sign in and put in your application. I don't know that they are looking to reject people. Like
Hmm.
I haven't really heard people say like, "Hey, I got rejected by Comics Pro," the way you hear about like Artist Alley, where
Hmm.
there's more people trying to get in than can attend. Maybe that happens, but I haven't heard about that happening. But yeah, there's an application process. You got to say what the type of stuff is you work on, give your website, all that kind of stuff. I mean, there is sort of like a minimum level of, to be a vendor. But I mean, everybody that goes, as far as I know, everybody that goes is paying to go.
Hmm.
Like, there's
Right.
no, you know, some of the fan conventions, they'll fly specific big name creators or whatever out for free and pay for all that stuff. The Comics Pro doesn't do that. At least not that I'm.
Right, but it does sound like, and we talk a lot in comics experience about the return on investment, the cost of going to a convention relative to how much you're going to actually make at a convention. It sounds like even though you don't have a table where you can actually sell books to make back some of the cost of going, it still sounds like the value of being there as a publisher or as a creator is worth it to actually, because LA, going to LA is not cheap unless you're on the West Coast. Being in LA is not cheap. But if you can actually talk to the people who are going to be making the orders, it sounds like it's something that might make just as much sense as trying to get into Artist Alley as anything else.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it is always going to be a cost benefit analysis, right? I mean, it's always going to be, does this actually make sense? Did it help my bottom line? And that can be really, really hard to do with conventions. Um, I go to San Diego Comic Con every year, not an inexpensive trip.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm not usually setting up a table selling stuff, so it's not like I have revenue coming in from there, but I have a ton of meetings.
Right.
And I don't usually come out of those meetings going, I got this freelance gig, or I got this consulting gig, or I made this deal for Comics Experience. I come out with a lot of leads, and
Hmm.
you never know which one of those are going to pay off, how quickly they're going to pay off. And more often than not, it's a conversation I didn't set up a meeting for
Right.
that takes place that winds up leading to something unexpected later on. So, I've had this conversation with my wife a lot of like, do I need to go every year or should I? And my feeling is partially because I like that show. Yes, I do need to go every year. But I don't think there's been a single year where I haven't come out with something something within the next 18 months that
Hmm.
I can trace back to that show that more than covers the cost of that show.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
sometimes
And
it takes more than one to cover the cost of the show, but yeah.
yeah, and we talk about this also a lot that it's the actual opportunity cost of going to conventions, whether it's something like Comics Pro or it's something like San Diego or Emerald City or something like that. It's not a dollar value that you can point to directly, but there is, at least in my experience, and I'm offering a much different service than a lot of other people that are going, but at least in my experience, the idea of not going means you are definitely losing out on an opportunity. But if you ask me what that opportunity is, I couldn't tell you because I don't know. And I'm not going to know for another 12
Right.
to 24 months. But I know it's there, but I can't tell you what it is. And that doesn't really sound like it makes sense. But if you've done it for a while, you know exactly what I'm talking
Yeah, it requires a lot of faith and a lot of confidence, I think. But if you're just starting out, your first one or two times probably won't,
about. Hmm.
immediately do that because you're there and you're making connections. And then when you see people again and they remember you, and then the conversation's that much easier and it goes a little further. Like there is a cascade effect,
Hmm.
as you continue to go to these things. You can of course overdo it and go to every convention under the sun, and that would most likely be a giant mistake.
Right.
But but if you choose one, two, three wisely to where you can network and you can meet some different types of people, but also follow up on them. Like for example, I go to C2E2 a lot in
Mhm.
Chicago because I'm not that far away, and I got a brother that lives outside of Chicago. I can stay for free. It just makes
Mhm.
a lot of sense for me to go to that show.
Right,
I can connect with a lot of people, and there's hardly an expense for me to go.
right.
So, but I don't go to like MegaCon because that's in Florida, and I don't know people that live there.
Right, right. And yeah, that's it is actually the opposite for me. I go to New York Comic Con because I'm in New York. I go to MegaCon because I have family in, in that area, so it's basically free. But it sounds like if you're a publisher, no matter what level of publisher, Comics Pro is something that you should at least consider because it's going to give you a different type of connection and experience that you're not going to get from, setting up a table in Artist Alley or on the show floor that may, and we can't say when or how, but may actually lead to significantly more orders and sales down the road. Is that
Yeah.
pretty much what we're saying?
Yeah, I think that wraps it up pretty nicely. Yeah.
All right. Well,
It's also
and
pretty fun. I enjoy myself when I'm there.
now, do you enjoy yourself as much at a Comics Pro type event as you do at like San Diego?
Well, they're different. San Diego, I really book meetings like in advance, like almost wall to wall.
Mhm.
So that's like, and that's the only one I do that for, and that one's pretty stressful, even though it's nice and I have a
Mhm.
cocktail at all times. But but it is a very different flavor from all of the other kind of fan shows, right? The fan shows you're interacting more with fans, and
Mhm.
there are more creators. So if you're a publisher and you're looking to network with creators, there's a lot more of that going on. So it serves a very different function, and it's um but yeah, it is still fun. I was surprised. I'll put it this way: I was surprised at how much fun I had when I have gone.
Well, I mean, I know you said before that lawyers are completely useless at this thing, but maybe I'll try to make it just because. I mean, if it's
I'm
fun, it's fun. Who cares?
I mean, those weren't the words I used, but I'm glad you picked up on what I was putting down.
Well, yeah, no, 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 I get it. I've been a lawyer long enough to realize when people don't want to talk to lawyers. That's fine. That's completely fine. I think that's a great place to wrap up. There will be information about joining Comics Experience in the show notes, along with some links to the bigger stories that came out of Comics Pro this year. So until the next time, I'm Gamal. He is Andy. Have fun with your comics.